That's going to be my tagline. An alternative scheduling. I'm out of here with less homework and more sleep.
Yeah, that's just a good point.
That's in my house. It's like, less homework, more sleep. I'm going to try to bring that home.
Naomi, I stole your star thought. Because I wanted to look for something. I wanted to make sure I had the last name right.
For who? What are you looking for? Tell me.
I want to make sure.
Kathy, 6 feet separation from her.
They're all the same. They're in my, if you go into
Oh.
my, in the bathroom,
Blame it on Starbucks.
that drawer where a bunch of my headbands are, my contacts are right there.
That thing that I texted you today, Dr. Robinson, that thing I texted you is
Yeah,
confirmation.
yeah, we just got, it's
Got
on the
it?
news
Oh,
now.
yeah.
I don't have it.
You can even say
It's the same people from before.
in the library.
Right.
Yeah.
But I heard it through word of mouth earlier,
Yeah.
but now it's
No,
confirmation.
anyway, it's the same two people who confirmed before.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
They were both there that day.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
275.
Yeah, great, 'cause that's where my boys work at. Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm in the library, yeah.
You were correcting your thing of not asking when. And now it's unfortunate, but the reality.
Yep.
Yeah. She told me.
Okay, I think we're ready. Microphones work? Hello? I think we're ready. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Quick announcement, Mr. Gilbert had a work commitment. He's not here, but everybody else is on the board. This meeting, we're following the agenda, but there's always a couple points that can be brought forward. Notably, board members that were involved in the advocacy portion are encouraged to speak during the advocacy update in 5C. And as always, our superintendent can provide a lot of updates on things that are very pertinent that he encounters in his day-to-day interaction. Obviously, the coronavirus is an important part, and I think the ideal time to present that it would be from him. I would not encourage a lot of questions even at all. If you have specific questions, come back in writing. We do have an agenda we want to continue to move to and keep it that way. Obviously, this is something further things will come out, but you will get the most recent input from the person in the district that's closely involved with all the decision-making and interaction therein. So can I start to adopt an agenda, please? Mr. Rajat, Mrs. Stevenson, second. All in favor? Okay. Let's go with some announcements. Grace, would you like to start off, please?
So recently I've been working on something having to do with mental health where I'm kind of iffy about some dates for things and talking to more people just because of things with the coronavirus. So I don't want to, have something planned out in like May and something go wrong with that. And then recently Speech and Debate had a tournament and that went really well. So
Congratulations.
it's wonderful.
Mrs. Miller, go ahead, please.
I don't have anything for you.
Okay.
So last week I traveled with several of my comrades, board members, Dr. Robinson and Dr. Wood, to visit the legislature in Albany to advocate to our policymakers, and I learned something every year from this outside of where not to park. And very much appreciate our administrators for all the work that they put into making, to have an organized presentation for our policymakers. So last week we had a policy meeting. The policies reviewed were the 8300 series, which is specific to instructional materials and will be on April's agenda. I've decided I'm not going to comment about the first and second readings because that's later in the agenda. And I do have comments, but honestly, they may be addressed before we even get there or not needed, so we'll see. We also had an IPAC meeting last week. It was a very good meeting. It was, it provided an opportunity for the Alternative Scheduling Committee to present their work and recommendation. And as you will see later in the agenda when Dr. Wood presents the process and what was discussed in the recommendation, I think you'll also appreciate the work that's gone into it. We also had a cultural diversity meeting yesterday, and the focus is planning for Sensational. It's still moving forward, taking shape nicely. I want to thank Ms. Stephanie Feinberg, our ENL teacher for Orenda and Carrigon, for her success in organizing a cultural potluck a few weeks back. And again, this was jointly between Orenda and Carrigon. The turnout was strong, the food was delicious. It was, the food kept coming the entire evening, and I have no doubt that this is going to become an annual tradition, and hopefully it will spread through all of our schools. I also want to thank all the teams that competed this past weekend at the Odyssey of the Mind Region 7 competition at High School East. We had representation from all of our schools, high school, middle school, and our elementary schools. Well, technically, 7 of the 8 elementary schools were represented in 5 of the teams. But I specifically want to congratulate our high school team that competed in the classical literature problem, and they will be advancing to states on April 4th. And all of our teams will be showcasing, well, at this point, we believe all the teams will be showcasing. Most have responded back with the affirmative at the Sensational. And my last comment is I'm looking forward to the high school musical Guys and Dolls, and I hope to see everyone there. Thank you.
Actually, due to a full agenda, I'll pass this evening on comments.
Basically, and I certainly don't want to take anything from Dr. Robinson's presentation on our advocacy effort, perhaps some of it would be very subjective observations that I've made. And this is not partisan in the least. This is across the board. It probably would be very good for most average citizens to pay attention very closely to the people that they elect and how they serve. Over the course of many years now in the process of lobbying, not just in this capacity, but as part of a teacher advocacy effort, I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of legislators. And then again, sometimes I haven't, and that would be part of what I've observed. There are some legislators who you virtually never meet. In fact, there was one from one of our districts. Always used to meet his chief of staff, number one, never understood why we had no opportunity to talk to him. After he had retired from his position, there was someone who worked in the legislature who I knew. He said, oh yeah, he had a job downtown. So he wasn't available because he had a full-time job elsewhere. That was probably the worst case scenario. There are other people who will bring you into their presence, and I say that with a little bit of bias, and they will regale you with stories and tell you about this, that, or the other thing, and basically what they are doing is filibustering, and they are not providing you an opportunity to share what you have to say. And then there is one in particular. I haven't met anyone that knows this fellow that has come away with anything other than the opinion that this is an extremely arrogant and indifferent individual. And people that are sitting at this table know exactly who I'm talking about. It's kind of discouraging. I think lobbying is a little bit like CPR. You perform it, and there's a certain percentage of time when you're successful, but there's a lot of times when it isn't, but you have to do it anyway. But you at least like to know that there's an interest. I did, on the other hand, see the other end of the other end of the spectrum. Again, one of our representatives sat in with us. She was informed. She asked good questions. She had obviously wanted to know. She may have had her political orientation, but she wanted to make an informed vote and be a factor in the decision-making process of her caucus. That's what we want. So I'm not going to say anything about the prospects of the legislation, other than say that I really don't think that there's any support of the governor's initiative for consolidating the expense-based aid. And I do think that if we had fiscal problems at the state level before due to a $6 billion deficit. The things that have happened in the stock market and the prospects for some kind of a negative impact on the economy due to disruption of the economy will not be a positive thing on our future, immediate future. I'm done.
Actually got comments tonight, believe it or not.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I got one contact in and one contact out, so it's even hard to even talk, believe it or not. Anyway, I just want to remind everybody that Green and White Gala is April 25th, so please mark your calendar. Mardi Gras theme, it's shaping up to be one good time, so hoping everybody's going to be there. The other thing that I just want to, and I don't normally do this, but, it's times like these, and I know Dr. Robinson is going to speak to it, but leaders that lead in this district lead, and they do it with grace, they do it with a pointed action that is just calm. And I will tell you from a personal standpoint, since last Thursday in talking with district leadership, my colleague Bob, we have come up against some different opinions throughout the community, and everybody's been great. I'm not saying I'm not being antagonistic at all. It's actually been phenomenal to be a part of this community working and sitting on this board around this table and working with Dr. Robinson. Just wonderful. I mean, his intellect, his way of delivering anything that comes out of here, he is just spot on. So I just want to give him some kudos tonight. Normally I don't sit here and pontificate, but I think it is important tonight to do so, because what leadership is sits one over from Bob right here. And Bob is great too, but I'm getting there. So I just wanted to give kudos where it's deserved.
You want to borrow my glasses?
That's coming, thank God.
I also attended the multicultural dinner with Karagan and Aranda, first time they've done that. I've always seen in the few weeks before Sensational, the non-high school buildings sort of struggle with what do you do? Do you try to do too much and steal the limelight? I think this was a great example of sort of a nice leading into it and complementing the event. I think a lot of students were there, a lot of parents were there, had some great conversations. So hopefully a trend that we continue year in, year out. The other thing I'd like to point out is on a Saturday morning, I noticed this in the Times Union, and this involves two of our students, Matt Joseph and John Maltz. We've seen both of them because both of them have been heavily involved in the acting programs here. We voted on both of them. I'm not sure if you can recall, but every summer there are two-week sessions where often the 8th grade and below will be involved in the play, and 9th through 12th are actually running it, and they're coaching and mentoring and sometimes being director or musical director, and we're actually paying them a stipend for that. And I think this is very important because this connects the dots for me on a lot of the programs we have. These kids now are putting together public service announcements on suicide awareness. They're doing this for the Rensselaer County Task Force on Suicide Awareness, part of Quest Star BOCES, and this is a unique thing that they have been drawn to. But their ability over the years to sort of pick this up, whether it be in middle school acting programs, or whether it be coaching and mentoring or involving behind the scenes, I think these two are setting the example for how someone can take all that experience that they get throughout this extracurricular activity and turn it into something very powerful in the future. Something that can take a message with all this technology and put it into a powerful film or public service announcement. And that doesn't happen by accident. A lot of it is art, a lot of it is understanding how these things come together. And I think our programs have shown it through these two that we can do that. And I think this is something we continue through the years and we'll continue to get better at. I remember a couple years ago, we had one of the musical groups came up, and Dr. Robinson asked, any of you are going to go on to film? And the one that spoke up was one young man. He said, I want to go into filmmaking. And so I think that also connected it for me. And I think that's how this sort of comes together with these programs. And we're creating a launch platform for these kids to go on to things that we never would have comprehended when we started. So Something we want to highlight, I definitely, look forward to seeing these kids, and we will see them Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Some of us will see all 4 shows, by the way. And it's a great opportunity to see how these kids, and our students really figure it out. And they start from nothing in December and put on a great show by March. Okay, that's it for me. For board comments. Any public comments moving forward?
To the students?
Do we have any students here for public comments? If not, any residents of the community that want to speak to the public, wants to speak to the board? No. Do I need to read this at this point?
No, since we don't have any.
I don't think so. Okay.
I'm just going to grab my contact.
All right.
I have to.
So at this point, we'll turn over to Dr. Robinson for Superintendent's Report.
Thanks, Mr. President. So just a couple of things. First of all, I want to start off with some good news. We have 3 of our administrators will be recognized in the coming weeks. We have Erica Ryan, who's the principal at Shattuck Elementary School, will be recognized as one of the Principal of the Year through CASDA. And we also have one of former recipients, Greg Pace, in past years was that. So Dr. Wood last year was a district level administrator of the year. A year ago, Mrs. Mallard was the special education director. So in other words, a lot of Shen folks get recognized for the quality of work that we're doing, so we're pleased with that. Mr. Colin, who's the athletic director, will be recognized as the athletic director of the year, and I would anticipate that, again, the athletic program will be recognized as one of the best, if not the best in the state as a result of the participation, which next month we're actually thinking about changing the venue because we have the potential of couple hundred kids here because of the success of the teams this past sports season. Kristen Lennon McMahon, who's the assistant principal at High School West, will be recognized by SANES, the Administrative Association, as one of the assistant principals of the year. So I share that with you because almost back to Mrs. Stevenson's comment, and I appreciate her compliment, I wish she was here, and I'll repeat it if necessary, is that we pride ourselves, I think, as not only an administrative team, but employees of the district, on trying to do the right things for the right reason. And sometimes that's difficult because sometimes, people want you to do the things because it's most popular and most expedient, most talked about, and sometimes those things don't necessarily fall in the category of doing the right things for the right reason, and we have to stay the course on some initiatives. So I want to say publicly kudos to those folks, and thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson, for your comment. I appreciate it very much, and certainly as we deal with the things that we're dealing with this time of the year, it's always good to get that reinforcement. Just some updates, and I won't necessarily provide details at this point. As you know, the situation with the corona virus is very fluid. In fact, it's not even day to day now, it's hour to hour in terms of how things change and how we have to respond accordingly as a system. In Friday Bulletin, I'll be sharing with the board some key points based upon some updates. We have what I'm calling a mandatory administration meeting on Thursday, where to bring all our administrative folks in the same place and having a single conversation around these things to make sure that we're all equally informed and equally prepared to engage in conversation with our parents, staff, students, or otherwise, because people will, quite frankly, be asking more questions versus less questions, and we need to be able to have consistent answers to those questions. Just a couple updates of things that's happening. The town of Clifton Park, some of you may have read, is in the process of putting together a committee. Myself and Mrs. Carmen will be representing the school district on that town public health committee. Similarly, today, Dr. Wood, Mrs. Carmen, and several others attended a county public health meeting. In fact, they just came back from that this evening to try to figure out what the county emergency response is doing, as well as the county health department. And that's critical because the health department particularly is a driving force in decision-making for schools via the New York State Health Department. So again, we had a pretty good representation of that, and we'll be debriefing tomorrow to get additional information from that piece of it. There's a regional collaborative that's taking place that's organized through the Capital Region BOCES. We have Monday morning WebEx calls, which I have a feeling will start to be turned into Monday, Wednesday, Friday WebEx calls because of how quickly information is sharing. The State Education Department issued some initial guidance, but they're still somewhat generalized. The governor yesterday, which is kind of ironic, which tweeted something, which I thought was kind of interesting, about, school closure, and that quickly created a firestorm across the state because people say, what does that actually mean? And right now, there's a statement out there talking about if a student or staff, someone in the school, a 24-hour closure, there's a lot of questions related to that. And there's a lot of guidance still needs to be handed down. We hope that maybe some point before the end of the day or tomorrow we'll get some further details related to that. The key to that is not a decision that we make as a school system. Any decision of that nature is a decision that's made. The New York State Health Department via the county will be making those decisions. And so that's a process that we're unpacking as we speak as well. And even if you read in the paper or you saw, if you follow in a Twitter links or anything of that nature, the development that's happening in New Rochelle, Rockland County, Westchester County area is an interesting one because, again, the governor. So kind of put things in context, and I think this is an important instructional point. During the winter months, we hear about state of emergencies. When the governor called a state of emergency, said no one's on the road because of roads being snow covered or otherwise. That's one, and they talk about non-essential employees not to work. That's one form of state of emergency for weather-related type thing. This past week, the governor declared a state of emergency for New York. There was a state of emergency that looked more at procurement, the ability for the governor, the executive office, to expend funds as well as to direct other agencies directly versus having to go through the normal processes when we don't have a state emergency. Consequently, as a result of that, today's decision to create this containment zone, I think that's what the media at least is reporting it as, around New Rochelle is an example of now with the governor having the authority to declare a state of emergency, he now could also declare a containment zone anywhere, anytime he so chooses. And those people within the containment zone, particularly public entities, school being one, have no choice but to simply comply with whatever that dictate is. And we're watching it very closely because, they're talking about having National Guards coming in and cleaning school buildings, which I think is the most bizarre thing. Because I'm sure all the people who are weekend warriors in the National Guard, the last thing they thought about that they'll be spending their weekends scrubbing down schools. So we're watching that. I share that with you not to be facetious and make light of it, but we're really watching all those things because those become the model for whatever the potential next action is. And the question we always have to ask is how sustainable are those things? Forget about how logical, how sustainable are those things that we're watching? So that's why I say the situation is very fluid for us. As a system, we're kind of looking at 7 areas, so to speak, particularly 6 areas. We're looking at, what happens, the protocols about potential cases. If we have protocol about there's protocol, if we have potential cases, it's a county health issue because we have to remember this issue, you have public policy over here, the political side of it, then you have public health over here, and then you have education in the middle. And so literally, as I describe it, we're getting this. We're getting squeezed from both sides because you have political decisions being made. That's state of emergency, executive branch having authority. Those are political decisions. Public health decisions being made, CDC, World Health Organization, New York State Health Department, which we communicate a lot of information. When we get information, we try to send it out to parents, but we try not to send stuff out redundantly that's not different because after a while people start reading it versus try to send when we have new information, worthwhile information. So we're seeing this side of it, and so now as the political side of it becomes much more aggressive, the question then is what do we do in the middle of the school? And that's the big conversation point with us. So issues of potential cases, there's protocols in terms of we contacting the health department making determination. Is their ability, do they have the capacity to investigate effectively? All those are huge questions that not only Saratoga County, but quite frankly across the states being asked. issues surrounding school closure. What's the rules and regs? Right now, it's the 24-hour rule that's out there, and the question is, what does that 24-hour rule actually mean? You know, the statement for government, we will come in and assess. The big question is, who's the we? And so that's a big question, because the people who we think logical would be the we, they're saying, well, we're not sure if we're the we neither. And certain state education departments have the capacity to do it. The county, as far as I know, they're focused on the health issue side of it. So who is the we? Big questions to ask and answer as we relate to those kind of things. A lot of questions surrounding attendance. What happened to students' attendance? What happened to state aid? We have all these other stuff that quite frankly, go beyond the immediacy of the health issues. We are steadfast as a school system focused on what we call non-pharmaceutical interventions. You know, the cleaning, the sanitizing, the hand washing, all the things that we send out to parents. Just recently we sent a correspondence about how to talk to your child about these kind of things and good practices at home and how those good practices translate to school. So that's a big piece that we're talking about, the sanitizing the buildings, sanitizing the buses. And all those things on the surface sound simple. But when you think about, we're just doing some numbers today, for instance, our 206 buses, we would go through 700 cases, which has, I think, 60 in each within a month of Clorox. We can't even get it. And that's the irony of it. You know, so somebody say, you should do it. Well, where are we getting it from? And the governor, again, part of his executive power charged, what's the name of the prison up north? One of the prisons, just forget about it. One of the prisons are now producing sanitizer, and the question is how fast, because it's supposed to be provided to areas that are in with known cases first, and Saratoga County has at least 2 known cases that's been confirmed. And so we even put a request in today, and the people who were supposed to request it from said, well, we're not sure what the process is, protocols is yet. So I say this with you because sometimes when parents come to us and say, why don't you do this, why don't you do this, why can't you do this? It's great thought, but there's a whole process behind making that thought become a reality in terms of execute. We're looking at protocols related to field trips and large gatherings as we speak, international trips, domestic trips. So the easier one was to begin in looking at international trips, because there's certain countries that Kel, can you do this for me? There's certain countries that we're banned from sending kids to, and now that has expanded. So I share that with you as a board because those are all the moving parts related to field trips, large gatherings, who's happening where, and cancellation of events. So again, we're assessing, looking at those protocols as well. And then communications is probably the biggest one. You know, when we talk about communications, and it's one of those kind of things, and Mr. DeLallo used the CPR example, it's one of those things that we can't do enough, because oftentimes if people don't hear what they want to hear, the statement is that, well, we're not communicating with them. But the reality of it is, as a system, we have to communicate very objectively. I can't tell you my view, my opinion on it. I'm going to tell you what be it regs, protocols, or otherwise, dictate that we as a system can do, what we are doing as a system, and those are things, and where people get other resources outside in the community. A good example just was informed today, and I'm not sure if they want to broadcast it. Saratoga Hospital has a tent outside of the hospital for people to go and get tested. I would venture to guess that's going to become a model at every hospital now, or we have here in Clifton Park, Half Moon, a lot of these urgent care facilities. But the problem with that is we don't have enough tests for people to actually effectively do it. So again, and I hesitate to say, hey, go and do this, and they say, well, the school said we're supposed to do it, then you can't. And then it becomes, we set people up for failure, so to speak. So this is a very fluid situation. I share those points to share that we're looking at all those things and taking a very responsible approach to all those things. We can't have overreactions that, one, we can't sustain, or overreactions that cause another set of problems that we have to, quite frankly, spend a lot of time and resource to mitigate, and then being distracted from the more significant issues that we have to deal with as a system. So more to come. Is very fluid, very fluid. I mean, literally, I probably get 25, 30 emails a day specifically about this from different agencies, and a lot of them just sending something that another agency already sent to you 10 times, and so you get frustrated because you keep reading the same thing, think it's new news on this matter. So more to come, and we hope by Friday, a lot of these other things will pan out, and we'll have actually much more concrete directive. But I got to tell you, more and more, I'm going to use that piece again. You have public health, you have public policy, you have educational provisions, and right now, a lot of the decisions aren't ours to make. The health decisions aren't ours to make. School closure decisions aren't ours to make. If there's a containment zone, ours to make. And all we try to do is to try to provide some logic to both sides, and that's the reason why we had a large contingent today at the county level to see what they're saying, to make sure that people aren't coming up with great ideas that are not so great. And the issue we have is tremendous difficulty of influencing what's coming out of the state's level, because that's largely being driven by the governor's office at this point. So that's where we are for in a large totality. We more likely probably by end of the week send something else out again to the community, because information is changing, the number of cases are changing. We have questions of parents saying, should I leave my kid at home? My response is, it's your kid. And it sounds facetious, and some people I'm not going to give you, it's your choice as a parent, knowing your kid's circumstances, to make that decision. And I often relate it to snow days, when parents criticize me for every snow day decision. And I was like, you have a choice. You really do have a choice to make. And I would never, ever tell a parent who's concerned about his or her child to make a decision that they think runs counter to the health, welfare, and safety of the child. Never, ever do that. That's not my place to ever do that piece of it as we move forward. So those are critical decisions that people have to wrestle with all the time. And also, we also have to guard against, quite frankly, total overreactions that add to the presumptions and assumptions that people make about what's happening, what's not happening, and try to provide factual information. So more to come. This is probably right now the most consuming thing in terms of certainly my time and focus. And related to that, we still have budget going on. We'll be doing budget presentation to the board next week, and kind of ties in. I'll just pick up the advocacy piece, so when Dr. Wood come up, we don't have to break the piece up. Ties into the interesting piece. I was just talking to someone today as a follow-up to some advocacy conversation, and trying to make sure that, yes, concern about the coronavirus is important, and I would say critically important, and making sure that the process of ensuring education, healthcare in the state of New York through the budget process is critically important, and that process is not being dormant or left for one person to make the decision that we wake up after April 1st and say, who did that? And we can't say April Fools, because it's the reality that we're going to have to deal with. And so that's the balance, to make sure that yes, while we're all focused on this, we're also focused on those realities from the advocacy piece of it, because as was pointed out, when we meet with our legislators, we get all over the place. Some people who are shocked to hear that, I'm not on the education committee, so I don't have anything to tell you. Wrong answer. At least lie to us, tell us something. So some people give us a lot of details about what they think is going to happen, and for us as a system, sadly, for the past 3 years or so, we have grown less and less reliant on increase in state aid. And certainly the prospect of it was somewhat slim going into the year, and back to Mr. DeLallo's point, the fear is that there's going to be an overreaction to the realities of the marketplace, and what does that translate to in terms of what the state's going to think their coffers are in terms of affordability, and subsequently the distribution of aid to schools, and that's a real concern. And even for a place like Shen, where I think because of decisions of the board and actions of the administration and staff, that we've been able to provide a quality education for kids and want to preserve that. It's I wouldn't say it's a problem. We're not at that point. So you have concerns, problem, crisis. It's a concern. So I want to put in perspective. It's a concern. Not a problem yet. We're going to make sure it's not a problem. We don't, we're going to make sure it's not a crisis. And so those are the other factors that we have to deal with on the advocacy side in terms of follow-up as well. So let me just stop there, see if there's any thoughts, comments the board has, particular to anything I've said so far. So more to come in Friday Bulletin. Hopefully I'll have much more definitive piece. And again, the public, whoever's listening here or otherwise, know that one of the things that we pride ourselves on, I give kudos to Mrs. DeFiciano, who's our public information officer, is to try to be as transparent as we can with the public. And we only tell people what we know. If we don't know it, we're not going to tell it. We're not going to make it up. We're not going to make any presumptions about it. We're going to tell people what we know. And if there's something that we know, if there's something we haven't decided on, we have no problem saying we haven't decided on that yet. And there's reason probably why we haven't decided on those things yet, in terms of can we effectively do those things over and over and over under various circumstances. And that's a piece that we have to do all the time with whatever decisions that we make.
I was thinking while you were saying that, and I think there is one thing that perhaps you could share with the board and as a consequence with the public. It's maybe getting ahead of it, but of things. I know we have a logical sequence, and one of the last things we actually want to talk about is revenue. But in the process of lobbying, I thought you made a very succinct and very clear assessment of what real difference there is on the revenue side coming from the state. The impact of the cost-based aid
Expense-driven
and
aids,
growth fare versus real increase, the false impression that we're getting more money and we're getting, if you could share it.
Yeah, so that came from the current proposal in the governor's budget, and the keywords current and proposal, where he wants to merge 10 aid categories. And again, so I'm going to characterize it, and I'm going to put, for the record, characterizing what I think is the whole smoke and mirrors approach to things. If I call it, it's spaghetti, right? You lump a bunch of stuff into the sauce, and all of a sudden everything kind of tastes like the most dominant thing that's in there, and then you have no idea what other ingredients are. And that's the problem I have, because if you start unpacking it, all of a sudden expense-driven aids, which basically, for people who don't know, we spend in year one, we get reimbursed in year two at a certain percentage. So we're banking in year two that reimbursement based upon expenditures, and we're subsequently budgeting in year two with the assumption that we're getting that reimbursement back. So if someone all of a sudden put all this stuff into one, in year two, what we actually supposed to get back is actually lower, but we can't tell if it's lower or not, then all of a sudden we have, as a system, create a structural deficit based upon an assumption that should be correct, but assumption that was hijacked by that piece of it. So unpacking everything, we reveal now that, you take those increase that people say Shannon's getting an increase. Any increase you get is because we're spending a little bit more and subsequently getting a little bit more reimbursement. The reality of it, the foundation aid piece, which is a state obligation to provide a basis for fiscal neutrality, if you will, across school districts based upon wealth. So some people get more to bring their foundation aid up, so you complement with your district wealth. Ours, quite frankly, has been flat. But you can really tell that when everything is in one thing. And fear of it is if it stays that way, that could actually start going down, and we still wouldn't be able to tell what's going down, what's driving what. And all of a sudden we're making decisions about program that we shouldn't be making decisions about programs, when I say program, services to kids, instruction, because we're trying to balance fiscal pieces versus we could separate operational costs. Transportation is one. Building aid is one. We should be able to separate those things from instructional pieces. And on the surface, again, it's one of those kind of things. On the surface, people don't think about it in that sense of it. But when you're planning piece by piece, each room in the house, I need to know what's the capacity for each room in the house before I can say I'm going to run out and buy a whole bunch of furniture and I come back and none of it fits. Using that analogy. So those are the kind of conversation we try to have with some of our legislative folks to make it very simple, so people can understand that what's on the surface appears to be harmless. You start unpacking and you realize, oh, We didn't realize that's the potential implications of it. And I think there's quite a few things like that in this whole process that happens in the 12th hour of the legislative process that we all have to watch. And quite frankly, it's the same thing and again, it's not a criticism of politics. We know how political decisions are, or that's what I call them, political decisions, because they're made with a different set of circumstances in mind. And so we're watching even with the coronavirus piece. When decisions are made, someone make a bold pronouncement, who's going to execute it? How is it executed? What are the ramifications? And typically, it's the person on the ground level that parents could come to board meetings. No parents can say, I'm going to go and go march into the governor's office right now and demand an explanation. You can't go to the state education department and demand an explanation. You can't go to the New York State Health Department and demand an explanation. You may get someone at the county, I don't know anything about county government, but local school boards is your open venues, open public meetings, and oftentimes people expect that we should have all the answers to everything out there. All we can do is provide information, use the guidance to make the best decisions. And I'm going to tell you, the best decision we always try to make is how do we provide quality education for our kids in an environment that takes into consideration their health and welfare and safety. That doesn't change regardless of what's happening. And it may become more challenging, but it doesn't change that. I mean, that's our primary business first and foremost. So, again, thank you for the indulgence of time here. I appreciate it.
So now to move to what, alternative schedule model? Thank you.
Do you mind scrolling? All right, pleased to present an overview of where we're at with alternative schedule. Last week, the alternative schedule committee members presented to IPAC, which was the first of 2 times of taking the presentation to IPAC to field questions related to the alternative schedule work. So what I will walk through this evening is really an overview of what IPAC saw, which is our Instructional Program Advisory Council, and as part of our contract with the Teachers Association, we take things to this body to review significant changes prior to moving them forward. So what will be outlined is kind of our why behind the alternative scheduling work, the actual work that has been going on with the committee, how we have been finalizing the next steps. In other words, there's only so long that you can spend deliberating in committee, and then you have to know where you're headed. Our communications as we've been going, taking a closer look at the alternating schedule, what a block schedule looks like when you take it from a 9-period day into a 4x4, 4x2 block schedule, and then our focus on professional learning, which is so critical to the conversation. So a little bit of background, the alternative schedule really requires us to think about where do we want to go. We know what this model is that we've been using in Shenendehowa schools for, I don't even know the number off the top of my head, 50 years, something like that. That has been the model. And at some point you have to say, does this continue to be the best model to provide instruction for our students? We know things have changed. The Chromebooks in classrooms, the fact that kids are carrying, the vast majority of our kids have more information in their pocket than ever before, just at their fingertips. Our standards are changing. Our standards are trying to keep up from the national level, from the state level, recognizing that we're carrying around all these facts in our pocket, really easy access, and shifting the standards to deeper thinking. Like science units have all changed to being very phenomenon-based. In fact, I was in a 2nd grade classroom right after the teachers were cleaning up from one of our new science kits last week, and there was sand everywhere. But, when I looked at it, I thought, this is amazing hands-on learning. What did I hear from the teachers? How much time it took to provide that type of opportunity. My point is that this type of hands-on instruction requires more time than feeling like, oh, now we have to shift, and now we have to shift. We know that our schedule how we use time is the most important part of the schedule. Time is the most important commodity that we have. And we really do want to maximize contact time, and we want to minimize transition, and we'd really like to minimize the stress within the organization for students and teachers as we do this, really look seriously at this change. I also do want to note that we started talking about it as an administrative team several years ago, but it was really, sometimes I have to hear something multiple times before I really want to tackle something of this magnitude. It was the number of teachers we were hiring from other districts who said, yes, I want to work at Shen, and a few months into working here, and they were standout superstars in their other districts. We were so pleased to get them here. And they said, the one thing I'm really disappointed about is our schedule. I came from a different scheduling model, and I cannot adjust back to this type of schedule. And have heard it from multiple teachers who have made that. And we're also hearing it internally from our teachers who have their own children in different systems, saying, have we ever considered it? I didn't know anything about it personally, but now that I see that my children are experiencing this, I really have to wonder if this would be something we should be looking at Shen. So when we started hearing that, from multiple angles. It was not from any one department or any one level, but again and again, we said, all right, I guess it's time. So that gets us here. The committee started meeting, it was over, it was January of 19. We have met a number of times. I want to say we've had at least 15 meetings. But even prior to the committee meeting, we did that big survey where we had 1,300 stakeholders provide some sort of feedback. And we weren't really specific in the survey, but our takeaway was, are you interested in making some sort of change or considering a change to the schedule? And we had overwhelming positive feedback that, yeah, that would be of interest, talking about it, learning about it more. We also held last year, Kelly DeFisciani and I conducted stakeholder groups, like focus groups, with parents, some students and teachers, and we did 5 or 6 of them, and got some very good feedback where we said, well, what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? And after about an hour's worth of conversation, a number of people who came in very, like, why are we even having the conversation, left saying, there's probably something to this. In fact, one was a student who is now a senior at our high school, who I ended up seeing her mother after, said, when I dropped her off, I can tell you that was not her perspective. And when she got back in the car, she said, I think that's probably a good thing to do. I thought, okay. So all along the way, we've been seeing these very positive signs that go beyond any one person or one thing that we've done, but just in general. So we formed the committee. We have 32 members representing middle school and high school. We have teachers from almost every department, and those with varied levels of experience with an alternative schedule. Some were teachers from other districts, some are folks who've been here at Shen for a very long time. And the first work of the committee was to really refine our why. So why do we want to do this? What do we intend to get out of it? We really wanted to make sure that that document we developed a few years ago that it outlines the characteristics of an engaged classroom. What does an engaged classroom look like? We want to make sure that that is something that is doable in every classroom and can be experienced by every student. We want to make sure there are opportunities for deep, authentic learning so that people can make a mess with sand in the classroom and feel like there's time for kids to get dirty, learn from it, draw their conclusions, and there's still time to clean up and transition. We would really like to minimize the number of transitions. It's go, bell rings, go again, bell rings throughout the day. The amount of time spent walking in the hallway at the high school is nearly an hour a day. So if you do 5-minute transitions times 10 over the course of the day, it is amazing what is spent. Now, that exercise and socialization is great, but that time can also go into getting up, moving around within a classroom and deeper focused learning. And it's the more we can minimize transitions, the better for everyone, particularly school safety, which leads into the next bullet. We really do want to focus on whatever we can do to support student mental health wellness and teacher mental health and wellness. The idea that our students and teachers would prepare for 4 blocks the next day, for many students, that's about half, right? So they may have more to do in that, but it isn't taking home, now I have to think about taking home all materials for all 7 classes. I have these 4 classes tomorrow, I have these 3 classes the next day. There's also that if you if you are concerned that you may not understand that material, you have the whole next day to get in touch with your teacher before it's due the following day. So it gives you a little cushion in there. For teachers with 2 preps, 3 preps, they're thinking about, let me figure out what are the ones I need to prep for tomorrow? How can I use that lesson plan the next day? How can the next day be prepping for the other classes? I've heard from some people who've taught in this model saying, I used it because I had 1 prep or I had 2 preps. I used one day as my planning day for both days and my other day as my grading day. And so I would know going into my prep periods that that was how I was going to spend my time, but it provided me an opportunity to spend more time doing one thing as opposed to moving to the next. So we are very serious about manageable preparation for the next day. We have maintained all along a do no harm clause. We know there are a certain number of students in the high school right now who cannot access every single course they would like to take. We have a rough idea of what that percentage is. It doesn't fit, it's a one-off, they have 2 specialty courses, they're offered at the same time. There are a number of reasons why students can't get certain courses. When we say that do no harm clause, we mean we are not looking to elevate that number at all. If we could decrease it, that would be fabulous, but we know kind of the parameters in which we end up sending out disenrollment contact information to students, or how many students the counselors have to call in the summer and say, I'm sorry, this just doesn't work in your schedule. We know that now. We want to make sure that we're not increasing that number in any way, and if we can decrease it, that would be great too. We also talked about access to course materials. This is really, it can be relevant at either middle school or high school, but we're hearing from particularly teachers of middle school who have student athletes in their classroom who are playing freshman or JV, that they in certain sports are missing the same class multiple times. Will it completely resolve it moving to an alternating block? No. But might they be there the first half of the block? Yes. And if you're a teacher, you'll take seeing them for half of that time versus none of that time. Hands down any day. So, I don't want to lead you down a road thinking it will resolve it entirely. It may not, but it may make it better. So as the committee was working, I was posing a number of questions to them. And at one point, several said, aren't there people who have done this elsewhere? And we said, yes, there are. And so we started calling around to districts who've made the move, and I said, who did you work with? Who did you work with? And it seemed like all roads led back to Elliott, Marin. And I thought, well, that's really interesting that you contact multiple districts and you get the same name back. So I reached out to this Mr. Marin, who I understood has been doing this work for a very long time, and I thought, well, I hope he has a succession plan or something. I don't know if he's still working. Well, lo and behold, he was very interested in working with us and has made multiple trips to Shen, and I don't think I'm exaggerating at this point to say he's come from Baltimore to us at least 6 times at this point. He has been really probably the best consultant we've ever worked with. He is knowledgeable. He asks the right questions up front. Before he would even say yes to us, he wanted to come in and assess the capacity of our high school and middle school schedulers, our administrators who were building the schedule, to make sure that even if we were to make a change, that they had the wherewithal to use the system effectively to actually operationalize the changes. You can tell he's been burned by this previously. He asked just the right questions to make sure that we're like, oh, okay, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He came to the committee multiple times, drew out different options for the committee to work through, and the committee immediately developed a tremendous amount of respect for him and his work. He also said, and he was really insistent, if I'm going to come work at Shen, I have to know that we're going to talk about professional development at the same time, because if we don't do professional development associated with it, what you might get is a teacher saying, well, I used to do this on day 32, and I used to do this on day 33, and I'm going to put my 40-minute day 32 and my 40-minute day 33 lessons together, and students will sit through a double block of it. And he said, if you do that, you will not have realized any of the benefits, or at least the majority of the benefits of this change, and so professional development is an imperative if I'm going to work with you. And so he came and has now, at least on 3 different occasions, worked with us on lesson design in an extended block that provides for multiple engagements for students. So after about a year of working with the committee, I started to wonder, and I say I, because I'm just giving you what was in my head, do they need more time to talk and think? Do they want more, or are we at the point where we can actually poll the committee and see where we're at? And so in December, we talked about surveying them. The survey went out to the committee in January, and I'll tell you, I was blown away by the results that we got. Every committee member could choose from 3 possible answers. Yes, so it was basically, what's your support for moving to an alternating 80? So, and I first want to say, middle school went off and researched a 60-minute block schedule extensively. It was not as though the consultant said, this is the only other alternative schedule. Middle school came in, and the teachers and the administrators from the middle school came in very interested in moving to a 60-minute, which is a rotating block. So you see 6 instead of 9 classes a day, and they drop out and they shift. I said, no, okay, not a problem. We talked about it. If that's what you're interested in looking at, go ahead and look at it. They spent days and days trying to work through it, working with the consultant, could not come up with a schedule that they thought was any sort of improvement. They themselves came back and said, we actually think the alternating 80 is the way to go. So at that point is when we administered the survey, and the survey showed that if you're given the choice of yes, I support it, and here's why, maybe I support it, I do support it if these things are addressed, and no, I don't support it, and why, that in the month of January, we had 81% unequivocal, I am all in on this. We had 5 of the, so 15%, 16% say, yes, if the maybe, if XYZ, that XYZ are things we have to do, such as contract alignment, such as making sure room utilization works out. So when you factor those numbers together, we had overwhelming support just with the yeses, but when you add in the maybes, which are things that we have to account for, we have really solid support coming out of the committee, which was very interesting. And when you ask them why, here are the reasons that they share. I look forward to the opportunity to provide deeper learning in the classroom. I really believe that this is what it does. I believe it provides for better time management. I think it's really important to have fewer transitions and then figure out what part of that transitional time we can recapture for other things, such as it's called a flex period or an advisory period where teachers are still in their teaching day and students are in school unassigned, and there's greater opportunity for teacher-student contact. More time, when you're collecting homework less and you're taking attendance less frequently, that time that is recaptured can go into things like conversation and movement in the classroom and building relationships. And the other, the most often responses that we got, the last one was opportunities to build better relationships or have a calmer atmosphere, feeling a little bit less like you're go, 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 go all day long. So I'm not going to walk through this in great detail. If you have a real interest, you have it in the board packet, but this gives you a sense of what it's like. Down the left-hand side is what a student's typical schedule is now, grades 6 through 12. You get 9 periods a day with a scheduled lunch instruction. A move to an alternating block, they get lunch, it just isn't shown in this model. What you do is you pull out a lunch period because it's not a separate freestanding period. It becomes attached to either block 2 or block 3, the beginning or the end, and you extend that block during the school day. So in the case that is on the screen right now, this student would have 4 classes on days 1, and see how it says day 1/3. It's day 1, and then again on day 3, so it's in every other day. And then on days 2 and 4, they would have 4 classes, with that second block being study hall on one of the 4 and PE on the opposite. And the same with chorus and study hall. And then there's the additional lunch and flex time. You'll see on the next schedule what it looks like and how you marry PE and a science lab at the high school. You actually move away from having like a separate lab period, and on that 4-day rotation, 3 of them are science and the 4th day is PE, which actually gives science teachers a great deal of flexibility in that if they don't get to the lab this day, they can do the lab the next day. If they have a lab that doesn't get cleaned up that day, they can flow into it in the next class period without feeling like, oh, this is my class period, oh, this is my lab period, and the two need to remain very separate and distinct. You'll see next a sample teacher schedule, what a current teacher schedule that actually happens to be one of our committee members, Dan Schmidt, who is a Spanish teacher at High School West. That is what his schedule on the left looks like currently, and that's what it would move into so that you could see what a sample schedule would look like. You'll see it looks like, I see Gary's look, a retired teacher here, that he would be teaching a very long time on day one with block 2, 3, and 4 right in a row. However, that lunch period, 30-minute lunch, would be built in there. And the student-teacher contact time would remain the same, which would also mean that teacher planning time would remain the same as well. So as I mentioned at the start, we presented this to IPAC last week, and reminded IPAC as part of that presentation that their role was to provide conceptual approval, much like they do for courses. We do not have it right down to the minute and know exactly what the schedule will look like. We know conceptually we're looking at an alternating block schedule, and we are still working out a lot of finer points behind the scenes. That is no different than when we take new courses to IPAC, just like the health science courses. I think we've renamed them after they've gone to IPAC. We're working on the curriculum, but we have sought the conceptual improvement, received the conceptual improvement as from the board, and are moving forward. And that's important in this case because we need added time. We're looking at making this change September 2021. It is going to take us every month between now and then working on this to ensure a successful, smooth, well-planned out implementation. So the committee has worked to develop a very specific timeline, most of which is kind of holding administrators to these are the timelines and the benchmarks we need to hit so that we're ready to go. You'll see in logistics, which is the the left column in that category, that we are in the table that it would be going to IPAC. The alternative schedule has also been presented to the middle school faculty once, to the high school faculty once. It's going to happen again for both faculties. I've been sitting in attendance at most of those presentations. We are going to begin the conversation of alignment with the contract, the STA contract, in short order. This spring, ideally targeting ratification and asking for STA ratification and board approval in the fall 2020. We're also working on a really thorough professional learning plan and communications, which I will get to next. We also want to make sure that we are thinking about any potential budget implications like we are for next year related to professional learning associated with getting ready, but also if there were any staffing implications so that we would be prepared. So here is what I would say is our forward-facing timeline. This is the timeline that's a little more readable and more easily digested. It is posted on our website. And I also want to note, Kelly DeFisciani, our public information officer, has done a great job. She's maintained a public website on our, well, I say public, it's our district website of what we've been doing in the committee. We also have an Inside Shen page, which is an internal website where we've been posting notes from every single meeting that we've had. Our documents, the list of committee members, pictures, just so that we can bring along anybody who's going out and really has an interest, and we also send it out periodically as a reminder that it's there. And this communication timeline appears both on the district website and on Inside Shen. So as I've mentioned, to realize this goal, it is much more than building a good schedule. It really focuses on the need for quality professional learning. We are planning Superintendents Conference Day, grades 6 through 12. All of our secondary departments will have almost a full day from 9 to 3 focused on lesson plan design in an extended block to learn and focus on how to design a lesson that is truly engaging and provides for, in Elliott and Marin Bloom's approach, multiple engagements within the lesson design. So all teachers will be doing that 6/12 on March 20th. We're then going to start looking at our summer curriculum work from this lens, our faculty meetings, our department meetings next year, our professional learning community conversations through next year. We are also asking in part of the 2021 budget for funds to set aside for additional professional development for teachers. Some of that would be content specific. So as teachers are learning about the new science standards, for example, the new science standards are important to learn about, A, because they're the new standards, but B, because they really lend themselves to being instructed in a longer block. So we're trying to think about how do we make sure that science teachers hear some science examples and not trying to figure out, okay, well, you gave an English example, what would that be like for me as a science teacher? So this work is really about planning for the future. I had this graphic before for you, but just bringing it back around. We right now are planning our little ones that are in our elementary schools. What is their livelihood going to be? What are they going to experience when they're in college even? How do we program them for success? And what are the environments that they will be in, and how do we provide the most meaningful educational experience so that they're not just learning and regurgitating facts and moving on to the next thing, but really getting in deep and having a quality experience so that when they come to the end of this 13-year journey and they cross the ages back, they can say, yeah, that was the best experience I could have possibly had.
If I were in the classroom, everything that you've outlined looks really, really great. And I could definitely see advantages to it. But if I've been teaching for 20 years, there's a lot of anxiety because this is really different. You're not making the mistake that the state made when they implemented the new standards, and I'm not talking the most recent standards, but the ones that caused so much controversy a few years ago, whereas people were not adequately prepared but expected to implement it. That's fine. I see everything up front. Is there a provision now for ongoing support once we get into it? Because that's really...
That's where the 2021 budget will, so for next year's budget, we have professional development in preparing. And each year we have a professional development piece and we do summer curriculum work. And so that will be as focused as needed, so to speak, Gary, as we look at it. And that's something that we said from the very beginning of this process is that this is a fundamental change of the experience for students and teachers alike. And I always joke that kids go elementary school in this very nurturing environment where everything is slow. They have a lot of times with a teacher, and that's why every kid loves the elementary experience. And their parents love the kids' experience. Then they get into middle school, every sixth grade kid run in the hallway because they think they're going to be afraid to class. They just run everywhere. Then they get in high school, and by the senior year, kids, probably Grace, maybe a better student than my daughter, has absolute senioritis, can't take it anymore because I can't take the transition. And then they go to college, and the biggest things that kids struggle with is time management. So when you think about that piece of it, so how do we then fundamentally start saying to these brilliant minds, we're going to slow the game down. Slow the game down so you can engage in learning, and not slow the game down so you're playing the game of school. And so because we fundamentally believe that's going to do that, we have to put our money where our mouth is in terms of how we invest in professional development, how we try to bring in the best minds to do this work with us, and also even how we send people other places so they can become turnkey trainers as well. So we if the board recall, not to prolong this too much, when we started doing some of the rollout of our ELA series at an elementary level, we started adding literacy coaches. When we rolled out the one-to-one, we added Vanessa Kramer here in the middle school to make sure that there was a built-in coach to be there for folks. We will have built-in coaches to be there for folks as we move forward, because at the end of the day, the success isn't about we patting ourselves on our back. The success is not, Grace would be a junior in college by then. The success is for all those kids who are in sixth grade now, experiencing it for the first time, or kids who are in third grade now coming into middle school and saying, whoa, this is pretty cool, because we did it right. And that's the end goal, that reaction when kids have that. And so having built-in coaches is going to be something we have to invest in.
The only follow-up question came, fantastic amount of pre-planning, structural support in line. There are going to be glitches. Who's responsible for identifying the glitches and addressing them?
Thank you. That's a great question. On the logistics, and I didn't go through it as carefully as I probably should have. In Infinite Campus, which is our student information system, that is where we build our student schedules. They have a staging site. We can actually put this year's schedule in once it's properly configured, and right now our middle school and high school administrators are working with the company to get it properly configured so that we can actually start running test scenarios We have already plotted out on paper room utilization. We know what it is now. We know what it would look like. We know we may need to take this room, which is currently carved up into 4 small group instruction, but it's highly underutilized, and convert that back into a classroom. You know, so it's all those details are being worked on right now. And so then next year we can do it all over again. We can take next year's 9-period day schedule, put it in the staging site again, and see what are all the conflicts. Because every year from June and July, even up through the beginning of August, our schedulers are resolving conflicts and saying, if I move this class here, look how many more students can access this course. So we never really build a schedule. A, there's no such thing as a perfect schedule. B, we never build a schedule that doesn't have some level of conflicts that we end up living with. But with proper planning, we can get it down, the number of conflicts way down, and that's what all this legwork in advance is for.
Have we identified costs or whatever associated with having material that supports this transition that's compatible with the prolonged instructional period and so forth versus what we've been using in 45-minute blocks or whatever?
That's interesting. I have not yet heard, based on, and we've done at least 3 different professional learning sessions based with the multiple engagements, anybody say that's going to compel us to look at getting different. I have heard, I'm very excited because the material we're currently asking for and reviewing fits in that model really nicely. But it doesn't, we're not going to close our ears. If somebody finds that there's a need, we're going to want to try to meet that need.
And the grants that I think it's DIDIC that have been
The
awarded
future grants.
are also intended to support classrooms that are teaching. We're already seeing it happening in the high school. When I was there for the speech and debate, I was surprised to go into classrooms that already had the table set up. So it's meant to promote. It's a different methodology of learning. It's interesting when Dr. Robinson said you're slowing down learning. I don't really see it as slowing down learning. In fact, I think learning will speed up because of the different approach, just allowing for this deeper learning. It won't, you know, it's a different approach. I just don't see it as slowing it down. And the other thing I wanted to add is I do think all the questions that you're having are being addressed or are being asked. And I sat in last week and I listened to the questions, the concerns of the teachers who are part of the alternative scheduling committee. And so they've been doing this a long time. They're hearing what's being said. It may just take a little bit longer to convince them to get there. But one thing that I'd like to add, and I was concerned that it came across wrong or not really the way I intended last week, but I shared my son's experience because he graduated from Shen and he was very happy. And he did say to me when he graduated, I'm really happy with my experience in high school. Now he gets to college, but he was nervous about college being more work than high school. And he gets to college and, you know, it's a block schedule. And he's amazed of, you know, how much better he can manage his life. And for the first time, he's actually in study groups. You know, he and his friends can get together and can study together and work on. And so that type of, it's given him this freedom that he didn't expect to have. It's given them this control he didn't expect to have. And then he came back and said, I feel like Shen's doing it, making it harder than it needs to be. And I don't think it's any slight on our teachers. I just think it's just, for him, he thought it was going to be a continuation of that in college, and it wasn't. And so I think there is something to that, and it's good to get feedback from our students. And I'm really curious because Grace will experience this before she graduates from Shen. In your senior year, you'll experience this. And do you have any apprehension going that direction?
At least for me, I know I'm going to be taking enough classes to where, like, next year, like, I won't have a lunch period, and that's fine. I want that. But I'm just a little bit wary of even senior year, how that's going to play out in a 4x4 to have that many classes trying to get shoved in and work where people are going to have to drop out of electives.
So that's an important point. There will be no option to not have a lunch. The maximum number of classes a student will be able to take in the change are 8 classes. I personally struggle with the idea that any student would schedule through their lunch. Lunch is a really important time of day. Our mental health is really important, and we rush really for what, right? There's no guarantee that we get into any certain school of our choice. With that said, we do offer some period zero options. Is that something we could consider? Possibly, but that what you bring up is an important point. And I also want to note, we have very few students who skip. Grace is the rare exception that takes 9 classes. That will not be a possibility, and if you were my child, I would say that's a good thing. That's up to you and your mom to figure out, but I think really we want to make sure kids have a little time to breathe during the day.
I think, yeah, because that's more because, like, 8 periods. No, I'm taking AP Studio next year. That's a double period. That's really the only reason why that's happening. So any, like, classes like that, that's just going to be, is that going to be reduced to 1 block, or would that be just
Those would
every
be modified.
day?
Same thing with skinnies. You have skinnies on the other side.
I
Is there a
missed which
weird-
course you were speaking of.
Like AP Studio, it's
Oh.
a double
It's longer
period every
period of
day. So for weird, like classes like that,
Got it. Okay.
would they be just like,
Well, that's a great class to be
Yeah.
taking, by the way.
Thank
And that's a great reason to miss lunch.
yeah.
What we are doing with every department where there are those specialized courses is the administrator, in most cases at high school, Mr. Augustinoni, is sitting down with the department leaders and the teachers of those classes and figuring out what is the best way to offer, particularly the double block classes. Does it make sense to have it block 1 to every day, right? So then you get that double block. Or is it better to run it vertically where you have like 2 blocks in a row, but every other day? Most I'm hearing seem to be leaning toward it's block 1 every day, but that doesn't have to be that way. If the construction class or the auto tech class decides at some point that running it vertically every other day for a longer block, by the time they get out to the construction site, they get their clothes changed or their tool belts on and they get out there and they get started working on a project. If they prefer to schedule it vertically after experiencing it, like AP Art may in time, that change could be made or accommodated in the schedule.
During Saturday's community conversation, I thought it was interesting, and I remember this very well. Dr. Robinson mentioned a lot of times the kids come home and they just don't recall just what homework they have to do that night. I mean, it's just a long list. And I've seen a lot of parents, and it's so much different than what I experienced, which is that I sort of felt I could strategize about my homework. I'd figure out things I could knock out really quickly, but I always felt I had, in my high school experience, just the ability to sort of pick what to focus on, but I always felt I wasn't missing anything. And I think with the students today is it's just a long list for them. And I see it halfway through the night, they go, oh my gosh, I forgot something. I think that, and that's kind of where we're at. That's the current status in terms of getting students to have a positive experience with homework. 5 years ago, we challenged ourselves and we looked at a policy to really make homework more purposeful. And I think one of the outcomes is that I think we talked about it, I think people took it on board, but this presents a great opportunity through the PD side of it. And as you mentioned, you don't want to have 32, 33 just be crammed into 80 hours, into 80 minutes. You want to have some thought as to how do I, during that week, minimize homework because I can probably include things in that week and free up time to just, absorb a deeper sense of learning. So to me, I'm sort of looking at a tagline behind this, a marketing phrase, but just this is the opportunity for us to have more deeper learning, less homework, and really more sleep. That's how I try to
More
consider it.
sleep.
is what we're going to get at.
That should go first. No.
Yeah.
I'd like to think it's the same for teachers.
Yeah.
That same tagline I'd like to think first for students, and then I'd like to think the same would hold true for teachers, because then I think we would really see like, all right, we're all in, we're ready to go.
I think it will be an interesting experience to watch what happens when the go slows down, and will there be a reduction in stress and anxiety in them, and them being our kids.
And to Mr. Presley's point, the idea that maybe rather than giving math homework every single night, maybe we're not doubling it on that one night, that we can get as much as we need from what our previous assignment was, or just a little bit more. It would be really great for many students if that was a positive outcome.
also interested in seeing some of the students that do struggle now, having more time where they can slow down and think through things, but be more engaged, where it's more interesting to them and looking at it from a different perspective to see that maybe they're going to learn in a different way and maybe not struggle as much. So I'm hoping to see that with the deeper learning as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Wood, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We also want to circle back on the nominating petitions for board vacancies. So if anybody is interested, please come up.
45 signatures required.
Yeah.
45 or
45.
You got to come up and get it.
No, we give it to you then. Like the minutes. They're available to the public through the district clerk's office, which is Mrs. Chase. And so they're also available online too. So we encourage the two incumbents, Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Hoffman, to
start filling them out?
Do we formally make a statement now?
after you actually fill it out.
Okay.
It's not real until it's real.
It's not real. Well, that would be April, what is it, April 1st? Is that what it is?
No, the petitions. I don't
No,
have the
we take it
deadline.
back.
No.
April-
No, I can give you that. You can
It's in April,
April 20th.
April 20th, okay.
And let's now move over to policies and procedures first reading. Mrs. Carmen, please.
Good evening. So tonight we have the policies being presented for first reading that went to policy review in February. And one of the things that I do want to note on this agenda is you'll see a couple things. The school counseling plan that is attached has not been updated. It will be updated, actually it's about 99% done, and will be presented to the Board of Education in May when we present, or the end of April I think it is actually, when we present an update on school counseling in general. And the other policy I just want to make note of, which is the programs and projects funded by Title I. We now have a regulation to this policy, and just the policy itself has been reviewed and updated to ensure that we have the proper protocols in place and how we're communicating with parents and families and working with them and helping students who are participating in those programs. Any questions?
And I'll just add that the one that's out of series in this group is the Code of Ethics, and that it was the language was expanded to include Board of Education members, employees, and agents. And and you did a nice job defining what interest means so that the agent piece is clearer too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go move on to consent items. Treasurer's report. Can I have a motion on the treasurer's report? Mrs. Hoffman, Mrs. Stevenson, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And the minutes, February 11th, can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Stevenson, Mr. Zalalo, any comments, questions? February 11th minutes?
And abstain.
Yeah.
Abstain. So.
One abstention. All in favor? Okay. Let's go to February 25th minutes. Can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Hoffman, second. Mr. Delalo.
Gusta wasn't,
I don't think
I'm
that's here.
sorry, Bob.
Yep.
I got to go back. I'm looking at it. It was Todd, Christina, and Gusta were not at the 11th, on the 11th.
Right.
That's true. That's right.
Right.
We only
Yeah.
have 4.
Correct.
That's right.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
So it's still four, so it's 4 votes.
So there's
Still
4
have
votes.
4
yeah.
votes. Okay, so February 25th, motion, we have Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Rajat, comments? If not, all in favor? And let's go to action items. The first 3 are fairly significant bids. I think they're major changes, all positive, and we want to look at them separately. So the first one is the bid award for $100,000. I believe this is for what, Orangen roof systems, make them more stormproof. Can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Stevenson, second. Mrs. Miller, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor?
Did we want to make, I'm sorry, did we want to make a clarification about the difference between the total amount that was awarded and the actual?
I mean, it
Is that-
adds up, portion of it is through bid, portion of it is through state contract.
Right. So, the 43,000 is the bid
Is the
part.
bid, and then
And
the
then
rest
the
of it
rest is
portion
the
of state
60,000 state
contract, which
contract.
we don't have to bid.
Got it,
Okay. So second one, bid award, major improvement to High School West Auditorium, sound and video system. Motion on this one? Mrs. Hoffman. Mrs. Miller, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And the third one is renovating the high school east front area, making more secure. And can I get a motion on this one? Mrs. Rajat, second. Mrs. Stevenson, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? Okay, we'll combine 4 and 5, 2 bids, custodial supplies, swimming pool wash and acid, and a contract renewal for special ed frontline. Can I have a motion on these? Mr. DeLallo, second. Mrs. Hoffman, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And 6 and 7, 2 disposal items. The first one is for Chromebooks. That was presented last fall as a very worthwhile way to get our Chromebooks further utilized in society, as well as disposal of science equipment. Can I have a motion on 6 and 7? Mrs. Stevenson, second. Mrs. Miller, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And then number 8, scholarship and local grant donations. Can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Rajat, second. Mrs. Hoffman, any comments, questions? With gratitude. All in favor? With gratitude. And number 9, adoption of the 2020-2021 school calendar. Can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Miller, second. Mrs. Hoffman, any comments, questions? This is a big one for people's planning. Okay, all in favor? All right. And let's go to Mrs. Mila for acceptance of special education placements.
Good evening. I have the recommendations from the committees on preschool and school-age special education for this year and starting next year.
All right. Can I have a motion on this one? Mrs. Rajat, second. Mrs. Hoffman, any comments, questions? All in favor?
Thank you.
Okay, personnel, and I think some other changes came a little bit late. I wonder if you could show those and quickly summarize.
Well, there was, I don't have it on this
Yeah.
one. One change was there was another appointment for
Okay.
a leave of absence
Okay.
position. And so it's not on this,
Okay.
on this one.
We all saw it, we all had it, yeah.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I will
No problem.
apologize and amend that, but there was a leave of absence appointment that was put on.
I just wanted to jump in here and add that it's great to see Alyssa DeFabio as the girls varsity swim coach. She'll be a terrific addition and just what the girls varsity
Okay.
team needs.
awesome. Can I have a motion on staffing recommendations and transportation changes? Mrs. Hoffman, second. Mrs. Rajat, any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And let's go to second reading, policies and procedures. Mrs. Carmen, please come back up.
So the second reading policies were presented for first reading at the Board of Education meeting in February. Are there any questions regarding those?
Can I have a motion on the second reading policies? Mrs. Rajat, second. Mrs. Stevenson, all in favor? Okay. Passed. Final public comments. Anybody from the public would like to further or make some comments? If not, let's mention policy review. That continues per the schedule on the website. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Hoffman, second. Mrs. Miller, any comments? If not, all in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Nice job, sir.
Thank you. Nice to have you.
My apologies for long, that's 26 minutes longer.